Donald Trump says Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and the Palestinian Authority says if that's the case, the two-state solution is dead. But why did the Palestinian leadership have so much faith in the United States to begin with? I'll ask the Palestinian ambassador to the US. And in the arena, we'll debate how serious a threat the far right poses to democracy in Europe. Husam Zomlot, thanks for joining me on UpFront. President Trump on Wednesday recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. He says that he's just recognizing reality. Israel says it's its capital. Israel's seat of government is in Jerusalem. Israel's parliament is in Jerusalem. So why shouldn't Israel's closest ally, the United States, just recognize that reality and recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel?
Actually, that's exactly the opposite. He totally disrejected reality. Because reality of the city is that it is actually owned by the Palestinians. You're talking about 380,000 Palestinians who own East Jerusalem, every shop, every mosque, every church, every school.
And what do the Palestinians plan to actually do about this? There's nothing you can actually do to stop this move, is there? You're powerless.
Well, we don't see this move really to seriously affect the status of Jerusalem, because the status of Jerusalem is enshrined in its people and nation, enshrined in the region, the Arab and Islamic world, and enshrined in international law. And actually, what that statement did on Wednesday is to show the real international consensus about it. The opposition and the criticism has actually...
So why is everyone so upset? You're saying on the one hand, you're saying, oh, it's not a big deal.
Because this is... No, it is a big deal. It is a very big deal, because it's about the status of America. It's about the status of the U.S. administration directing such a hit on the heart of the two-state solution, which is Jerusalem, and disavowing and actually reneging on a written U.S. promise about the status of Jerusalem and the two-state solution is a stab in the back and is a kiss of death to the two-state solution. So it's a grave matter and a strategic matter.
It's a grave matter, it's a strategic matter, and I want to get into some of the details. You mentioned two-state solution and other issues. But why is this the moment that the Palestinian leadership has decided to say the U.S. is not an impartial broker, that, it's time to, end the two-state solution? Bill Clinton, back in 2000, when Camp David broke down, he blamed Yasser Arafat and the Palestinians for everything. He says all the fault of the Palestinians. In 2004, George W. Bush said to Ariel Sharon in a letter, you can keep most of the settlements in any peace deal. Barack Obama offered Israel the biggest military aid package in history, even while Israel was bombing Gaza twice during his presidency. None of those moments, you didn't come out and say, it's over now, you're not impartial. Why now? Why Jerusalem? Some would say too little, too late from the Palestinian leadership.
No, because Jerusalem is the heart of all the matter. Jerusalem is
thousands dying in Gaza when that was happening with American arms and munitions used by Israel. That wasn't the heart of the matter?
We're discussing politics now. And as far as a political strategic decision, Jerusalem is the make it or break it. Jerusalem is the gate of peace or anxiety and confrontations. We were trying to believe, and we were trying to hope against hope, okay, that the U.S. will come to one day to its real role as an equalizer and a mediator, but to keep its policy, which settlements are illegal.
Fine.
A solution is on the 67 borders. Jerusalem is the heart of the two-state solution.
Some people would say, what do you have to show for a quarter of a century of peacemaking, 25 years or so of negotiations, Oslo, Camp David, Annapolis? What did you get? What did the Palestinians get from that?
Dismal failure in the mediator side, in the U.S. side, and yes, America could not get itself to deal with the situation as a foreign policy issue, as a foreign...
But you were there with them every step of the way. You can't blame America now. When America was letting you down over 25 years, the Palestinian leadership was standing with the Americans at those hotels, at those summits, at those conferences.
Yes, but the America during these years might have made so many mistakes, and they did commit so many mistakes, but America did not change the rules of the game that we engaged in the Madrid peace process 1991 on its basis. 242338 UN Security Council resolutions, land for peace, the end of Israel's occupation that began in 1967, the establishment of a state of Palestine, independent and sovereign, East Jerusalem, its capital, the illegality of the settlements. I'm talking about a written position, okay? And this U.S. policy has remained all these years.
Okay, so now it's changed.
Now it has changed.
So is cutting ties with the U.S. government on the table? Is that an option? Or will you stay negotiating with the U.S. no matter what?
No. I think the state staying negotiating no matter what is definitely not not on the agenda. And I believe today...
So what is on the agenda? Just help us out.
It's a self-inflicting disqualification of the U.S. as a mediator.
Okay.
And we believe this administration, by this announcement, has really delivered three big damages. The first is to the U.S. status as a mediator.
Yep.
The second is to the ability of the U.S. to actually bring about a two-state solution, because they aimed a shot at the heart of the two-state solution, which is Jerusalem. Okay. The third, they actually disempowered the constituency of peace. You know, the peace camp, the hundreds of millions in the region and worldwide who wants to see an end to this conflict. And they empowered who? The Armageddonists, the non-solutionists, the ideologues, the terrorists who are burning families in the West Bank, the settlers, and the settler movement who are in control. They have empowered those who do not want to see a two-state solution.
You call it a lethal blow. You use the phrase lethal blow.
I use the phrase, it's a kiss of death.
Okay, kiss of death, lethal blow.
Yeah.
So let me ask you straight up, clearly.
Yes.
Is the two-state solution now dead?
The two-state solution from the U.S. point of view and mediation is dead, yes.
That's not what I asked.
No,
is it as a solution?
If tomorrow in the
dead?
Security Council...
No, not if tomorrow. Today.
Tomorrow,
as of now, we're speaking, post-Jerusalem, can there be a two-state solution still?
I don't like dramatic statements. You're talking to a diplomat. Let's not get mad into
it's not about dramatic. We'll say as undramatically as possible. Is the two-state solution dead?
I said yesterday.
You say you don't like dramatic solutions. You said he shot a bullet into the heart of the two states. That's pretty dramatic. So my response is it dead?
Yeah, Mahdi, it's not...
Your analogy, he fired a bullet, is it dead?
It's not my remit or responsibility to actually declare such a thing. I am only an ambassador, so I convey the messages of the leadership. Okay, so Saeb Erekat this week said, former chief negotiator for many years for the Palestinians, said President Trump has delivered a message to the Palestinian people, the two-state solution is over. Is he being dramatic as well? No, that's his right. He is the one who deals with the two-state solution. He's the chief negotiator.
So do you agree with him? Is it over?
He's the chief negotiator. Of course I agree with this.
So it's dead?
Mahdi.
I'm just trying to get clarity.
No.
The two-state solution, is it still an option? It's called a solution, right?
No.
Can it still solve the conflict?
This is being premature.
Okay.
This is being premature.
It's over.
No.
I'm quoting your chief negotiator.
Give the Palestinian leadership the ability to convene very soon, shortly.
Okay.
They will convene. A call has been issued, an invitation to the Central Council of the PLO. Let them set. This is a strategic moment. This is not a reactionary moment. The only option now available is one state, full equal rights for all people who live
some clarity.
Who live in the historic land of Palestine from the river to the sea.
That's very useful. Now we can have a discussion.
And the option of Netanyahu of an apartheid arrangements is going to be rejected, and the status quo is going to be rejected.
Hold on. Okay. You just gave a very long answer in which you said something quite dramatic, to use your phrase, that the two-state solution, one-state solution now. There's only one state, single state. That's what you're committing to. Saeb Erekat said the same thing this week.
It's not me who said. My president said.
Your president,
the UN General Assembly.
Okay, so the two-state solution is dead then.
He said if Netanyahu insists if the Netanyahu insists to kill and bury the two-state solution, the only option we will accept is full equal rights for Palestinians.
So as of this week, post-Jerusalem,
we believe the announcement
the Palestinian leadership, the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, committed to two states or one state? It's a very simple question. I'm just asking for clarification.
You want a strategic position now.
I just want to know what your position is on one or two states.
My position is that such an announcement that was made by President Trump has definitely, irreversibly damaged three things. Damaged the U.S. status as a mediator, damaged the prospects for a two-state solution because Jerusalem is at the heart of it, and damaged the constituency of peace. Now, what would be the consequences of that is something for the Palestinian national leadership to make, not for me.
One last question. As a Palestinian leader, what's your message to young Palestinians, maybe watching this show with this interview, who feel hopeless, who feel desperate, who feel the world is against them, who feel that they'll never be free, and this latest Jerusalem decision is just another blow to their hopes and aspirations? What's your message to them?
It was a catastrophic moment. It was a very hurtful moment, I understand, but it was also a moment that we saw the opportunity. This decision this announcement by President Trump has brought Jerusalem back on the international agenda. B, it has really brought the international consensus, singling out the U.S. administration out of the entire world, including the Pope of the Vatican. This is not the first time, Mahdi, from the Balfour Declaration and the British role all the way to the Trump announcement, Jerusalem remains Jerusalem. Nothing will touch its status, its identity, its belonging. The question is, where do we go now in the political and strategic sense? And I believe we Palestinians are capable. But for us, the most important side of the story is our self-reliance on our belief, which is unshakable.
Husam Zomlot, thank you for joining me on UpFront. Australia has always taken great pride in offering an outstanding quality of life, but there's an outrageous racial disparity hiding behind the official stats. UpFront producer Hannah Coombs has this week's reality check.
Australia tends to come out on top in global rankings. It's the second wealthiest nation on the planet per capita, and number 2 globally in terms of life expectancy, education, and standard of living.
We have always been a lucky country.
Well, lucky for some. For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians, it's another story entirely. According to the most recent comparative study, Australia was ranked 4th globally in terms of its UN Human Development Index, but Indigenous Australians alone would have come in 103rd place. Not surprising, given that today Aboriginal life expectancy is 10 years lower, the health conditions have been slammed by the UN as worse than Third World, and Indigenous children are 26 times more likely to be imprisoned, and sadly young Indigenous men have one of the highest suicide rates in the world. The disparity is the legacy of colonialism. British settlers first took hold of Australia on the 26th of January 1788, a date that is celebrated every year as Australia Day, although some prefer to call it Invasion Day. 1901 saw the beginning of the White Australia policy. The name says it all. And soon later, the government began a program to, quote, breed out the colour of Indigenous people, and forcibly removed 100,000 Aboriginal children from their families. This policy was in place until the 70s and has been officially classified as an act of genocide. And Aboriginal people were not counted in the census as part of the official human population until 1967. A century-long rights struggle has made strides toward justice, including some recognition of land rights. But government schemes aimed at reducing Indigenous disadvantage are failing miserably. And in 2015, the government actually cut funding to remote Aboriginal communities.
What we can't do is endlessly subsidise lifestyle choices.
Is living in one's ancestral homelands a lifestyle choice? Really? Today, plans are underway to finally recognise Aboriginal peoples in the Constitution. But unlike the US, Canada and New Zealand, Australia doesn't have a treaty with its First Peoples. It's as if Aboriginal dispossession never even happened. So next time you think of Picture Postcard Australia, it's worth remembering that while all Australians are born equal, some are more equal than others.
From France's Front National to Germany's Alternative for Deutschland to the neo-Nazis of Golden Dawn in Greece, far-right populists are grabbing the headlines and seem to be on the rise across Europe. In November, tens of thousands of people joined a nationalist march in Poland featuring both Islamophobes and anti-Semites, and which erupted in violence. So, are Europe's liberal values under assault, at risk from the far right, or is that an exaggeration? Are some on the left guilty of crying wolf? Joining me to discuss this are polakow-suransky, author of Go Back to Where You Came From, The Backlash Against Immigration and the Fate of Western Democracy, and David Goodhart in London, author of The Road to Somewhere, The Populist Revolt and the Future of Politics. David, Sasha, thanks for joining me on UpFront in the arena. David, we hear a lot about the rise of populists, neo-Nazis, the far right. Before we talk about the impact of that rise, especially in Europe, how would you distinguish between these different terms, phrases, or are they effectively all the same thing?
No, I don't think they are the same thing, and I mean, being able to define them clearly is part of the argument that I think we're now going to have. I mean, I would say that the kind of accepted definition of populist is the view that the vast majority of the people have the same interests, and those interests are pitted against a relatively small elite that controls society in its own interest and is corrupt and self-serving. So you can have populism of the left and you can have populism of the right. Neo-Nazism is sort of self-explanatory in a way. It's the sort of thuggish street groups, racist thuggish street groups, as you say, like Golden Dawn in Greece. I mean, far right is probably the most problematic of the three terms you mentioned. And there's a political argument about who should be categorised as far right or not. Should the Front National be regarded as far right? I'm not sure I would put them in that category, but Sasha might disagree with me.
So you would put the Front National in the far right category or not?
It probably has some far-right supporters in it. I mean, that's a different thing. But as a whole, I would say, the Front National are, are a legitimate part of French politics. I mean, they can't not be. They got a third of the vote in the presidential election.
Okay, Sasha.
Just because Marine Le Pen got 1/3 of the vote doesn't somehow legitimize her or normalize her. It seems to me, David, that you're arguing that simply because these parties have given voice to the supposedly long-silenced grievances of the working class, that somehow they are all a corrective to the political system. And I would ask you, do you think that parties advocating doing away with birthright citizenship, banning mosque construction, or banning the construction of minarets or halal meat, are these decent populists? Is it decent populism when the Danish government decides that it's going to take away valuables from refugees arriving? I would argue that these sorts of ideas and these sorts of policies are actually a threat to our political systems, and we need to distinguish between populist parties that are voicing grievances, legitimate ones, and those who are actually threatening the core values of our societies.
David.
There is absolutely no threat to liberal democracy in Europe. We have a lot of parties. Some are decent populists, I think, or legitimate populists, and some are illegitimate populists. I mean, racism is one of the obvious dividing lines, or various forms of extreme Islamophobia would count as that too. But there's absolutely no evidence. Sasha produced no evidence in his book that liberal democracy is about to collapse. I mean, or rather, he cited the burkini ban in France, which was then overturned, I think, by the courts anyway, and everyone regarded that as pretty absurd.
Well, David, what I would argue is that the election results...
Lots of populist parties have been in government. Eh?
These election results, the fact that Marine Le Pen won 33% on the platform that she ran on is evidence that some of these values are eroding. I'm not arguing that liberal democracy has disappeared or is disappearing tomorrow. I'm arguing that there's a dangerous trend throughout Europe, and we need to pay attention to it. And what I think you're doing in your zeal to embrace your new political tribe in Britain is you're whitewashing a lot of very dangerous parties and dangerous ideas. And that is a problem.
You don't have to agree with the populists or want to vote for them, but it is important to distinguish. I think that there are really nasty groups in Europe, and there are groups who you, and perhaps to a lesser extent me, disagree with, but who are part of the legitimate mainstream of politics.
But what about the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland in Germany? A lot of people were worried when a party like that got back into the German parliament, 7 decades on from when we actually saw actual Nazis in the parliament. Obviously, they're not actual neo-Nazis. In a country like Germany, you can't even call people Nazi without there being, massive legal repercussions. What do you make of a party like that? Are you worried about a party like that being in parliament? Is that a threat to liberal values?
No, I don't think it is, actually. I did read the party's manifesto. It talks about the values of the Enlightenment. It doesn't even really talk very much about reducing immigration. It talks very much about reducing refugee inflows. It's a popular nationalist, conservative popular nationalist party. I mean, I think in most other countries in Europe, the AfD would be regarded as pretty mainstream.
Well, unlike David, I've actually spent some time discussing their ideas with the leaders of the AfD during the campaign and the year before. And what I would say is that the AfD is giving voice to views that were long taboo, and some of those views are very dangerous. Many of the people who flooded into the AfD when it went from being a Eurosceptic party to an overtly anti-immigrant party drove out the founders of the AfD. The people who actually founded the party are no longer running it. And if you'll recall, during the refugee crisis of late 2015, the then leader of the AfD, Frauke Petry, actually advocated using armed force, shooting at refugees who are coming across the border into Germany. More recently, the AfD has failed to expel from its ranks a regional leader, Björn Höcke, who has called the Holocaust Memorial in downtown Berlin a monument of shame. I would argue, David, that both of those examples are a direct threat to post-war German liberal democratic values.
No, but this is a kind of anecdotalism. I mean, what one leader says or one official of a party says and what the party actually stands for and what most
this is the leader of the party 2 years ago.
Is a completely different thing. Look, you've just written a whole book. Sasha, you've just written a whole book about how liberal democracy is under threat, and you have failed to make this delineation. I mean, I think this is precisely what we should talk about, because I think there is such a tendency amongst the liberal moral panickers, as I would call them, to regard all expressions of cultural and social loss as some form of xenophobia and racism. And I think this is extremely destructive. And let's talk about what is the legitimate delineation. I mean, I think racism is the obvious delineation. And I think
calling the Holocaust
mainstream
Memorial a
populist parties
monument
are not
of
racist.
shame is not racism?
Well, it depends what you're. I mean, obviously the Holocaust is part of Germany's shameful past. I mean, what did he mean by that? I don't know.
Well, as the grandson of German Jewish refugees, I consider
giving me
racist
individual
and
quotes from party officials is not making a proper delineation. If the guy is an anti-Semite, then obviously he's on the wrong side of the line.
David, if you're going to say it's a party program, let's just be clear, because you say you want to make the delineation. I want to hear your delineation. Is Golden Dawn a neo-Nazi party, in your view, a racist party?
Yeah.
But they would deny it, so wouldn't you take their word for it? Why would you not take their word for it? They would say we're not.
I don't think they do deny it. I mean,
they deny being a neo-Nazi party.
They go into immigrant neighbourhoods and they beat people up. You just have to look at what they do. And as far as I know, the AFD don't do that. UKIP certainly don't do that.
So is your litmus test just because you said you wanted
judge them by their
said,
actions?
Exactly. So just on that, just to be clear, you think violence is the litmus test, not just rhetoric?
Yeah, I mean that's violence is absolutely clear. Rhetoric is more complicated. It depends on the context. Who's saying it, how representative of the party they are.
Sasha.
Well, I would consider the statement of a party leader quite significant. It seems to me that you think violence is beyond the pale, but the advocacy of violence, verbally, is just fine. And going back to your point about moral panic, I'm fine if you would like to accuse me of stoking moral panic. I would say that others, including yourself, are guilty of moral abdication in the face of this threat.
Let's delineate between two different things that we haven't talked about. You mentioned earlier that you say elections. The fact that they're doing well in elections is a worry. Liberal democracy may not be gone now, but the trend, they're winning elections, they're getting into Parliament. The French are voting for Marine Le Pen in ever greater numbers. But what would you say to the argument that that's more a failure of establishment parties, not really a newfound love for the far right or for neo-Nazis, etc.? Larry Bartels, Harvard professor, a legend in this field, he's argued that the wave of populist sentiment is a myth. Its political potential is still largely submerged. Attitudes fueling right-wing populism have been remarkably stable since 2002.
I would argue that there's something new going on. I do agree that the left, the center-left, and the center-right, too, bear a great deal of responsibility. Their political failures and their inability to speak to these voters has led to the rise of these parties. But the other thing that populist parties have done throughout Europe, and especially in countries like Denmark and France, is that they've adopted the rhetoric of the old left. They're going after white working-class voters, not just making these cultural arguments about immigrants flooding our societies and taking them over, but they're actually saying, we will protect your welfare state, but for you and no one else. And I think that this is a very conscious effort to combine what was always a nativist position with the economic policies of the old left, and it's proven very effective.
I think the idea that we're kind of teetering on the edge of sort of mass pogroms, which if you listen to what Sasha is saying some of the time, that's the impression you get, is just completely wrong and alarmist. And I also think it's very damaging. It's damaging to, if you're a young British Muslim and you listen to what people like Sasha are saying about the surge of Islamophobia, it's gonna make you worried about joining the mainstream of your society, about applying for that job, applying for that course and so on.
So let me take that point that David raises about, especially how minorities see this, and are you exaggerating, are you alarmist? You suggested recently that, Sasha, that white nationalism is a threat to the West and to Europe. It's a bigger threat than even quote-unquote jihadist terrorism. Now, David would say that is the exact alarmism he's talking about.
I would argue that white nationalists are a threat to this country, the United States, and to many European countries because they can present themselves as natives who are valiantly defending the homeland against the invading hordes. And they often do this in their campaign rhetoric, and their policy proposals often reflect this view. And what I'm arguing when I say that they're a greater political threat than jihadists is that Hizb ut-Tahrir is not going to win power anytime soon in any European country. But what we've seen with Marine Le Pen and with the AfD, they've won 33% in France, 13% in Germany, and the next time that there's a major terrorist attack in Germany or France, their numbers are going to go up. And so, David, I'm not arguing that there are going to be pogroms tomorrow. I'm saying that there's a dangerous trend in many of these countries, and it's something that we need to be careful and watch out for. And to somehow just dismiss it and say, oh, that's scaremongering, that's crying wolf, and all of these parties are just giving voice to important sentiments.
We'll have to leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you both for joining me in the arena. That's our show. Up Front will be back next week.